All right, good morning, AP Macro students. Sitting here drinking my glass of emergency and trying to persevere through this quarantine. And hope you're all doing well. So here's some notes on topic 4.4, which deals with something known as fractional reserve banking and T-charts. So today we're just going to focus on fractional reserve banking, and probably tomorrow we'll get into this concept of T-charts. All right, so what is fractional reserve banking? So think of a fraction, and banks have to keep a fraction of the deposits made by their customers. This fraction is set by the Federal Reserve Bank. So you should know by this point that the Federal Reserve Bank is our nation's central bank. It's essentially the government for banking. The U.S. government, our Congress, and the president really they don't have much control over the Federal Reserve Bank. They can appoint people to serve on the Federal Reserve Bank, but overall the Federal Reserve Bank is really an autonomous institution that is the governing body for how banks run throughout the country. If you want to start a bank in this country, you have to be authorized by the Federal Reserve Bank, central bank. So first question I asked, how do banks make a profit? Banks make a profit by people making deposits in their bank, and then the bank takes those deposits and they loan them out. They loan them out to people to buy houses, to buy cars, to go to college, those things. And banks aren't making money just by loaning money out. They're making money by charging an interest rate when they make those loans. So that's how banks make profits. So really the bottom line here is banks have to have people make deposits in their bank in order to make money, because without those deposits, banks have no money to loan out. So you really need to understand that concept of how banks make money, or how banks make a profit in the first place. Banks have to keep a percentage of each deposit that their customers make. So if everybody in our AP Macro class has a checking account, banks, by law set by the Federal Reserve, have to keep a certain percentage. And right now that percentage is anywhere between 10 to 15%, depending on the size of the bank. So the question I ask is, why can't banks just loan out all of the money? So for example, if we each put $1,000 in our bank, why can't banks just take that $1,000 and loan it all out? So I'll give you a second to think about it. And the reason why is because if banks were to loan all of this money out, and you walked into the bank and wanted some of it back, or all of it back, your money wouldn't be there. By mandating that banks keep at least a percentage of all deposits, it ensures the bank for what's known as a bank run. This is a great example. I'm not going to play the scene. I included the slides in today's announcement, so if you want to click on this, it's from Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, a movie that was made back in the 40s. Really good movie if you haven't seen it. And this scene deals with George Bailey, the main character. He runs a building and loan organization, and this is a great example of a bank run. He's loaned out all of his money. He doesn't really have it, and people are angry and they want their money back. So the reason that the Fed creates what are known as fractional reserve limits is to insulate banks in the event that everybody wants their money out. And you might be thinking, all right, well, if it's only 10 to 15% of all deposits, that still isn't going to cover the bank if everybody wants their money out. That's true. The Fed's got a way around that too. If in the event that, say, Chase Bank looks and sees that all of their customers are outside their door and they all want their money back, obviously Chase Bank doesn't have enough in their vaults. They don't have enough liquid assets in their vaults to give everybody their money back. So what Chase Bank is going to do is they're going to call up either other banks or the Federal Reserve and borrow money from them to cover it. The Federal Reserve and other banks can charge them an interest rate for borrowing money. This happens all the time. At the end of the day, banks have to make sure that they have what are known as required reserves. Required reserves is the percentage of demand deposits that you're required to be held. I mentioned there that this required reserve is bigger for the big banks and smaller for the small banks. So I'll let you think about why that is. And if banks have money that's left over after those required reserves, so say the required reserve is 15%, that means that banks have 85% left over that they can loan out for whatever purpose. They can invest it in portfolios or stocks or bonds. They can loan it to the person down the street who wants to buy a house or a car. They have those things because that's how banks make money, by investing in and loaning the money. And this allows banks to actually create more money when they loan it out. You might be wondering why, and we're going to introduce, oh boy, talk about a spell check that I need to get into here. We're going to introduce a new formula, not a new formulta, a new formula called the money multiplier. Here's how the money multiplier works. This is another office reference. Dwight makes a deposit in the Lackawanna County Bank of $5,000. The bank has to keep 10% of it. So what you have to do right now to get you into this type of activity is you got to do two things. You got to find, of that $5,000, how much does Lackawanna County Bank have to hold on to, and how much do they have left over of that deposit to loan out. 10%, which is the required reserve, is $500. So the bank has to keep $500 of Dwight's deposit, which means that this bank now has $4,500 that they can loan out. Here's how to use what's known as the money multiplier to find, hang on, I'm going to pause the video for a second. All right, I'm back. You have children learning as well. I'm doing electronic learning, so I had to pause it for a second and help out with that. Okay, so the money multiplier. This is how you can use the required reserve to figure out how much new money is created in an economy. So if you remember, we use things known as the spending multiplier and the tax multiplier, which meant that if the government spent a certain amount of money, this could lead to a bigger increase in real GDP based off of MPC. Or if the government cut taxes, it could lead to a bigger increase in GDP based off of people's marginal propensity to consume. Now what we're going to use is the required reserves to figure out how much new money can be created when a bank has a certain required reserve and a certain deposit. So the first thing you got to do, you break it into steps. Find the multiplier. The multiplier is 1 over what the required reserve is. So if you go back to this example, 1 over 0.10 is 10. And then you would take that multiplier of 10 and multiply it by the excess reserves. This would lead to the maximum increase in what's known as the money supply, new money that's created within the economy. So here's an example. If somebody were to walk into Chase Bank and make a $500 deposit, the bank has the same required reserve of the previous bank, 10%. You have to find the maximum amount of new money that's created. So see if you can do that right now. Pause the video, and then we'll move on to the next slide with an answer key. Here's the answer. 1 over 0.10 is 10, like we mentioned before. Banks have to keep $50, which means they have $450 in excess reserves. So the multiplier times the excess reserves is $4,500. And you might be wondering, how does that work? Well, in the videos that I added with ACDC Econ, he goes into that in a little more detail, but just think about it. People are going to take that $4,500, or the bank is, they're going to loan it out. People are going to spend it. That spending money goes into other banks. Banks are going to take it and loan it out again. So it's like a chain reaction, guys. If you follow that chain, and if banks continue to loan money out, it's going to create new money. So if you're still puzzled by that, the videos in ACDC Econ will help you with this. These are some listed right there. I link them in the announcement. Got a couple more minutes. See if you can answer this question. $200 deposit, 10% required reserve. See how much of that deposit that the bank can lend, how much of that $200 deposit banks have to keep, and what the change in the money supply would be. Here's the answer. Banks can lend out $180 of the $200 deposit. They have to keep $20 because 10% of $200 is $20. And then the maximum new money that could be created within the economy if banks continue to lend it and people continue to spend it would be $1,800. You can try this one, pause the video. And there's the answer. The required reserve ratio, if banks have to keep $1,000 and demand deposits are $10,000, the required reserve ratio is 10%. So this is another way that the AP could frame a question like this instead of having you find new money created, they could have you find required reserves without giving you the answer. So this is the way to do it, okay? So at this point, I'm probably running out of time here. At this point, make sure that you can find required reserves, you can find the money multiplier, and you can find, given the multiplier, new money created, and you can tell me what fractional reserve banking is. I'm going to put this all in today's announcement. In today's announcement, there's a couple of YouTube videos, and also I'll link this site to some podcasts from the Journal. We're really living in some extraordinary times right now, guys, and these podcasts give you great information and some good detail about the economic impact of coronavirus, what the government and pharmaceutical companies are trying to do to create a cure for this, why oil prices are falling right now. These are short. If you're trying to apply some of the things we learned to real life events going on right now, these are some great ways of contextualizing this. If you have any questions, let me know. That's it for today. Have a good day.